I never thought my life would shatter in a room full of San Antonio's most powerful people, surrounded by million-dollar artwork and the finest champagne money could buy. But there I was, standing in the ballroom of the majestic square, watching my husband Marcus dismiss me like I was some annoying stranger who had wandered into his conversation. The annual Riverside Arts Foundation Gala was always the social event of the year. Everyone who mattered in our city attended: real estate moguls, tech entrepreneurs, oil executives, and their perfectly polished wives. I had been coming to this event for 18 years, first as Marcus's girlfriend, when he was still a struggling property developer with big dreams, then as his wife when those dreams started becoming reality. Tonight felt different, though. I had spent weeks preparing, choosing the perfect navy blue dress that complemented my silver-streaked hair, getting my nails done, even booking a facial at the spa Marcus's business partner's wife had recommended. At 54, I still turned heads, still maintained the figure that had caught Marcus's attention all those years ago when I was a rising star at Rodriguez and Associates, one of San Antonio's most prestigious law firms. The auction was in full swing when it happened. A stunning piece by a local Hispanic artist was up for bidding, bold strokes of red and gold that reminded me of the sunset over the Riverwalk. Marcus stood with his usual crowd of developers and city council members discussing some new project on the east side. I approached their circle, excited to share my thoughts about possibly bidding on the painting. But as I moved closer, Marcus's body language shifted. His shoulders tensed, and he angled himself away from me without even looking in my direction. When I gently touched his arm and suggested we bid on the artwork, his response cut through me like ice water. He basically told me to go find something else to occupy myself with, that this was business talk, not the time for my little art interests. The group of men around him chuckled uncomfortably, but they all avoided my eyes. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but I tried to laugh it off, mentioning that my legal background might actually be relevant to their discussion about zoning permits and city regulations. That's when Isabella Martinez, the 28-year-old wife of Marcus's newest business partner, appeared at his elbow, like she had been waiting for this moment. Her smile was sharp as a blade as she linked arms with Marcus and made some comment about how older wives sometimes didn't understand that business required focus and youth. The words hit me like a physical blow, especially when Marcus didn't defend me or correct her. Instead, he nodded along with whatever else she was saying and guided their little group toward the bar, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. I watched them walk away, Isabella's hand still on Marcus's arm, her laugh carrying back to me like nails on a chalkboard. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, like your opinions and contributions don't matter, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button, because what happened next changed everything, and I want to share this journey with women who understand what it feels like to be dismissed and overlooked. The security guard who approached me next would become the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. The security guard was polite but firm when he approached me. Someone had apparently complained that I was disrupting the auction proceedings by lingering near the business discussions. The humiliation burned in my throat as I realized Isabella had orchestrated my removal from my own social circle. I gathered what remained of my dignity and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor, like a countdown to the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. The valet brought my car around a silver Mercedes that Marcus had chosen because it projected the right image for a successful developer's wife. As I drove through downtown San Antonio's historic district, the familiar sights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. The majestic theater, the Riverwalk, the courthouse where I had once argued cases with passion and authority. All of it reminded me of the woman I used to be before I became Mrs. Marcus Vasquez. 20 years ago, I had been Elena Rodriguez Hartford, a rising star in corporate law with my own corner office, and a reputation for closing deals that others couldn't touch. I was bilingual, brilliant, and building something that belonged entirely to me. Then I met Marcus at a city planning meeting where he was presenting his vision for revitalizing the East Side neighborhoods. His passion was infectious, his dreams so big they seemed to fill the entire room. The early years of our relationship had felt like a partnership. He would bring me zoning questions and regulatory challenges, and I would navigate the legal complexities that were holding up his projects. My connections at City Hall opened doors that might have stayed closed for years. My inheritance from my grandmother, $50,000, that represented generations of her careful savings, became the seed money for his first major development. But somewhere along the way, partnership had become patronage. My legal expertise transformed from valuable counsel into helpful suggestions that he could take or leave. The woman who had once commanded courtrooms became someone whose opinions about art were dismissed as little interests that didn't belong in serious business conversations. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the house we had built together on a hill overlooking the city. Every detail had been Marcus's choice: the Spanish colonial architecture, the terracotta roof tiles, the sprawling layout designed to impress clients and business partners. I had wanted something smaller, cozier, maybe closer to the arts district downtown, but Marcus insisted we needed to project success. Inside my purse sat a small velvet box containing the anniversary gift I had planned to surprise him with tonight: vintage cufflinks that had belonged to his grandfather, the man who had first sparked Marcus's love of construction and building. I had spent weeks tracking them down through estate sales and antique dealers, wanting to honor the family history he treasured. Now the gift felt like evidence of my own foolishness. While I had been planning romantic gestures and supporting his dreams, he had been allowing other women to dismiss me publicly and treating my contributions like inconvenient interruptions. That night, sitting in my car in the driveway of a house that had never truly felt like home, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I walked through our house like I was seeing it for the first time. The marble foyer, the imported Italian furniture, the wine cellar stocked with bottles worth more than most people's monthly salaries. All of it built on foundations I had helped lay, but had somehow forgotten about over the years. Marcus wouldn't be home for hours, probably celebrating his successful networking at some after-party with Isabella and the rest of his business crowd. My home office sat at the back of the house, overlooking the pool and garden that a landscaping crew maintained because Marcus said we were too busy for yard work. I had designed this space myself, one of the few rooms where my preferences had actually mattered. Built-in bookshelves lined the walls, filled with law journals, art books, and the financial records I had been meticulously keeping for nearly 2 decades. I pulled out the filing cabinet I hadn't opened in months and began spreading documents across my desk. What I found in those folders made my hands shake with something between rage and disbelief. Every major deal Marcus had closed, every successful project that had built his reputation had my fingerprints all over it. The Riverside Commons development that put him on the map, I had structured the financing and navigated the environmental regulations. The luxury condos on Broadway that tripled his net worth. My connections at the city attorney's office had fast-tracked the permits. The commercial complex that made him a millionaire. My former law firm had provided the legal framework at a fraction of their usual rates because of my relationship with the senior partners. But it was the loan documents that truly shocked me. Page after page showed my signature as guarantor for millions in business debt. My credit, my assets, my inheritance from Grandma Rosa had been pledged as collateral for Marcus's ambitions. $12 million in loans that could bankrupt me personally if his developments failed, and I had signed every single document without fully grasping the implications because I trusted him completely. I found the paperwork from our joint investment account, the one we had opened when his business really started taking off. My attorney's salary had funded it for the first 5 years, contributing nearly $200,000, while Marcus reinvested every penny of profit back into new projects. According to the statements, that account now held over $800,000 money that had grown from my contributions in his business success. The most damning discovery came in a folder labeled Mesa Verde Project, his latest development on the East Side, the environmental impact study, the community outreach program, the legal strategy for dealing with historical preservation concerns all of it. Had my notes in the margins, my research, my solutions to problems that had threatened to kill the project before it started. I had been invisible at tonight's gala, dismissed as someone whose art interests didn't belong in serious business discussions. But these documents told a different story. They revealed a woman who had been the silent architect of her husband's empire, the legal mind behind his success, the financial backbone supporting his dreams. As I photographed each document with my phone, creating a digital record of my contributions, I realized that Marcus hadn't just been taking my support for granted. He had been erasing me from the narrative of his own success story. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I heard Marcus's key in the front door. I was still sitting in my office surrounded by 18 years of financial documents that told the real story of his success. The evidence of my contributions filled every surface loan guarantees, legal briefs, correspondence with city officials, bank statements showing my deposits into our joint accounts. His footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, followed by the familiar sound of him loosening his tie and checking his phone. I could hear him moving through the house, probably expecting to find me asleep and unaware of how thoroughly I had been humiliated at the gala. The last thing he expected was to discover that I had spent the evening conducting my own investigation into our financial partnership. When he found me in the office, his expression shifted from surprise to something approaching alarm. The documents spread across my desk told their own story, and Marcus was smart enough to recognize the implications immediately. He tried to play it off casually, asking why I was up so late and whether everything was okay, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I told him I had been reviewing our financial situation and had some questions about the scope of my involvement in his business ventures. The casual tone I used seemed to unnerve him more than outright accusations would have. He sat down across from my desk, and I watched him take in the loan documents, the bank statements, the legal files that proved just how integral I had been to building his empire. His phone had been buzzing constantly since he walked in the door. Isabella's name kept appearing on the screen, and each ignored call seemed to make him more agitated. When I asked if he needed to take his calls, he insisted it was just business that could wait until morning. But we both knew that wasn't true. I began walking him through what I had discovered, explaining how my contributions had enabled every major success in his career. My inheritance had funded his first development. My legal expertise had navigated regulatory challenges that would have destroyed lesser developers. My professional relationships had opened doors that money couldn't buy. My personal assets had been pledged as collateral for risks I hadn't fully understood. Marcus tried to minimize each point I raised, suggesting that marriages were partnerships, where both people contributed in different ways. He acknowledged my support, but framed it as the natural result of being a team rather than recognizing the specific value of my professional expertise and financial investment. That's when I told him I had been thinking about making some changes to our financial arrangements. I mentioned that I had spoken with my old colleagues about possibly returning to legal practice, that I missed having my own career and independent income. The color drained from his face as he realized I wasn't just upset about tonight's humiliation. I was questioning the fundamental structure of our entire relationship. His phone buzzed again with another call from Isabella, and this time, Marcus's panic became impossible to hide. Whatever celebration they had planned was clearly falling apart now that I was awake and asking uncomfortable questions about money contributions and recognition. I didn't sleep that night while Marcus tossed and turned beside me, his phone lighting up with messages he pretended not to see. I lay in the dark, making mental calculations. By the time dawn broke over the San Antonio skyline, I had a plan that would either save my future or destroy everything we had built together. Maybe both. At 6 a.m, I was sitting in my car, outside Carmen Rodriguez's law office downtown. Carmen had been my roommate at St. Mary's Law School, the brilliant daughter of migrant workers who had fought her way to the top of family law in Texas. We had stayed close over the years, and she was one of the few people who remembered Elena Rodriguez Hartford, the attorney, not just Elena Vasquez, the developer's wife. Carmen arrived at her office early, as she always did, and her expression shifted from surprise to concern when she saw me waiting in the parking lot. She knew me well enough to recognize that my composed exterior was hiding something significant. Over coffee in her conference room, I laid out everything I had discovered the night before. The documents I had photographed told a story that even Carmen found shocking as she reviewed the loan guarantees and investment records. She kept shaking her head and muttering about financial exposure that would make most attorneys refuse the case. But Carmen wasn't most attorneys, and she understood exactly what Marcus had done to me over the years. According to Carmen's analysis, I wasn't just entitled to compensation for my contributions, I was legally vulnerable to catastrophic losses if Marcus's business failed. My signature on those loan documents meant I could lose everything, including assets I had owned before our marriage, if his developments went south. The level of financial risk I had unknowingly accepted was staggering. But Carmen also saw opportunities that gave me hope for the first time in hours. Texas property law heavily favored documentation, and my meticulous record-keeping over 18 years created a paper trail that would be almost impossible to dispute. Every bank deposit, every legal memo, every city permit application bearing my research and recommendations could be used to establish my role as an essential business partner, rather than just a supportive spouse. The strategy Carmen outlined was both elegant and devastating. We would file a formal business partnership claim demanding recognition of my contributions and fair compensation for my ongoing financial exposure. The loan guarantees I had signed gave me legal standing to demand full access to Marcus's business records and financial projections. If he wanted to keep my assets as collateral for his dreams, he would have to acknowledge my role as a co-owner of those dreams. Carmen also recommended immediate action to protect my personal assets. We could file restraining orders on our joint accounts, preventing Marcus from making major financial decisions without my consent. My separate investment accounts and retirement funds could be shielded from business creditors through proper legal documentation. The next part will shock you. Hit that like button if you're ready to see what happens when a woman finally demands what she's worth. Because Elena's about to walk into Marcus's corporate headquarters and change everything forever. By 10 that morning, Carmen had drafted the preliminary paperwork that would either force Marcus to negotiate fairly or destroy his business entirely. The Vasquez Development Group occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, all glass and steel that projected exactly the kind of success Marcus had always craved. I had been to his office countless times over the years, usually bringing lunch or attending company parties, where I smiled and made small talk while the real business happened around me. Today felt different as I walked through the lobby, carrying a leather portfolio that contained 18 years of documentation. Marcus's assistant looked surprised to see me explaining that he was in an important board meeting that couldn't be interrupted. I told her I was here for the same meeting and walked past her desk toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus at the head of a long table, surrounded by his executives, city officials, and investors. Isabella sat to his right, taking notes like she belonged there. The conversation stopped when I entered the room. Every face turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, suggesting that this wasn't the best time for whatever I needed to discuss. I responded by placing my portfolio on the table and announcing that I was here to clarify my role in Vasquez Development Group for everyone present. The documents I spread across that polished conference table told a story that most of the people in that room had never heard. Loan guarantees totaling $12 million, all bearing my signature. Legal briefs I had written that had saved projects from regulatory shutdown. Environmental impact studies that contained my research and recommendations. Bank records showing my financial contributions to every major development Marcus had completed. Isabella's face went pale as I explained how my inheritance had funded the company's first acquisition, how my legal expertise had navigated zoning challenges that would have destroyed lesser developers, how my professional relationships had secured permits and approvals that typically took years to obtain. The men around the table began shifting uncomfortably as they realized they had been witnessing a business partnership, not a marriage spat. Marcus tried to minimize my contributions, framing them as the natural support any wife would provide to her husband's career. But the documents on the table spoke louder than his explanations. When I pointed out that my personal assets were currently securing loans for projects I had had no input on, the room fell silent. That's when I delivered the ultimatum that changed everything. I announced that I was formally claiming my rightful position as a business partner in Vasquez Development Group, with full access to financial records and decision-making authority proportional to my contributions and risk exposure. The alternative was immediate withdrawal of my financial support in legal action to recover my investments. Isabella tried to interject something about partnership agreements and corporate structure, but I cut her off by noting that someone who had been with the company for less than 6 months probably wasn't familiar with its founding history or financial foundation. The power dynamic in that room shifted completely as Marcus realized he was facing a choice between acknowledging my partnership or watching his empire collapse without the financial and legal support that had built it. News travels fast in San Antonio's tight-knit business community, especially when it involves one of the city's most prominent developers facing a potential partnership dispute with his own wife. By noon that same day, my phone was buzzing with calls from former colleagues who had heard whispers about the morning's boardroom confrontation. The first sign that the story was spreading came when my sister Maria called from her real estate office across town. She had heard from a client who worked at the city planning department that there were questions about the stability of Vasquez Development Group's current projects. Apparently, word had leaked that the company's financial backing was under review, and city officials were concerned about projects that might stall if funding issues arose. Carmen updated me on the legal filings we had submitted that morning. The partnership claim and asset protection orders were now part of the public record, which meant any journalist or business competitor could access the basic details of my case against Marcus. She warned me that reporters might start calling and that I should be prepared for the story to become very public very quickly. The San Antonio Business Journal was the first to pick up the story. Their reporter, a sharp young woman named Jessica Morales, had been covering real estate development for years and understood the implications of what was happening. The headline read, "Partnership Dispute Threatens Major Development Projects." And while it didn't name names, Anyone in the local business community could read between the lines. Isabella's position became increasingly uncomfortable as the scandal grew. The executives at Vasquez Development Group began treating her differently, questioning her authority and excluding her from important decisions. Her connection to Marcus, which had once seemed like an asset, now looked like a liability that could further damage the company's reputation. My former colleagues at Rodriguez and Associates reached out to offer support, and I realized how much I had missed being part of a professional community that valued my expertise. Several attorneys mentioned that they had always wondered why I had stepped away from such a promising career, and now they understood that I had been building something different but equally important. The mansion Marcus and I shared went on the market quietly listed through a discreet realtor who specialized in high-end properties. I had insisted on this step as part of my strategy to liquidate assets that could be seized if his business failed. The house had never felt like home anyway, and selling it would provide the capital I needed to rebuild my life independently. Local business leaders, who had known us as a couple for years, suddenly found themselves choosing sides. Some remained loyal to Marcus, viewing me as a disruptive force threatening a successful enterprise. Others, particularly women entrepreneurs and attorneys, saw my actions as long overdue recognition of contributions that had been invisible for too long. The social dynamics that had governed our lives for 18 years began shifting as people realized that the quiet, supportive wife they had known was actually a legal mind with significant business acumen and financial resources of her own. The community that had dismissed my art interests at the gala was now forced to confront the possibility that they had been underestimating me in every other area as well. Isabella's desperation became obvious when she launched what I can only describe as a coordinated character assassination campaign through social media. It started with subtle posts about family loyalty and supporting your spouse through difficult times, but quickly escalated into thinly veiled attacks on women who supposedly destroyed successful businesses out of spite and jealousy. Her Instagram stories painted a picture of herself as the victim of an older woman's vindictive breakdown. She posted photos from business dinners and corporate events, always positioned next to Marcus like she belonged there, with captions about dedication and hard work. The implication was clear: she was the devoted professional, while I was the unstable wife, causing unnecessary drama. Carmen showed me screenshots that her assistant had been collecting as evidence. Isabella had apparently convinced several of Marcus's business associates to share similar content, creating an echo chamber of support for their narrative. The post suggested that I was having some kind of midlife crisis, that my demands for recognition were really just attention-seeking behavior from a woman who couldn't accept that her husband had outgrown their relationship. What Isabella hadn't counted on was how many people in our community had been quietly watching our situation unfold with growing sympathy for my position. When she overplayed her hand by posting a photo from the gala with a caption about how some people couldn't handle not being the center of attention, the backlash was swift and brutal. Carmen's legal response was masterful. Instead of engaging with Isabella directly, she filed defamation notices that forced her to document every claim she had made about my mental state and motivations. Suddenly, Isabella found herself facing potential lawsuits from the woman she had been trying to discredit, and her social media posts became evidence in legal proceedings rather than effective propaganda. The pressure intensified when several prominent women in San Antonio's legal and business communities began sharing their own stories about financial contributions that had gone unrecognized in their marriages and partnerships. Isabella's attempt to isolate me instead sparked a broader conversation about women's invisible labor in building family wealth and business success. Marcus began distancing himself from Isabella as the legal heat increased and public opinion shifted. His investors and board members were already nervous about the partnership dispute, threatening his business stability, and having his company associated with a social media scandal made everything worse. He started missing meetings with Isabella and stopped returning her calls as quickly as he once had. The final blow to Isabella's strategy came when her own husband, Marcus's business partner, quietly suggested that she scale back her social media presence to avoid further complications for their shared business interests. Watching her lose support from the very people she had been trying to impress was almost as satisfying as seeing Marcus squirm in that boardroom. By the end of the week, Isabella had deleted most of her inflammatory posts and hired her own attorney to negotiate some kind of settlement that would protect her from the defamation claims Carmen had filed. Her campaign to destroy my reputation had backfired spectacularly, turning her into the liability she had tried to paint me as. The woman who had dismissed me as an older wife, who had lost her spark, was now scrambling to save her own position while I gained strength and support every day. The mediation sessions took place in a sterile conference room downtown, far removed from the emotional battlefield our marriage had become. Marcus sat across from me with his attorney, a sharp-dressed man who had clearly advised him that fighting my claims would be both expensive and futile. Carmen had done her homework too well, and the documentation of my contributions was overwhelming. 3 weeks of negotiations revealed the full scope of what I had built and what I was owed. The mediator, a retired judge named Patricia Sandoval, reviewed 18 years of financial records with the methodical precision I had once brought to complex legal cases. Her preliminary assessment shocked even Carmen. My contributions to Marcus's business empire totaled nearly $9 million in direct investment loan guarantees and unpaid professional services. Marcus's attorney tried to argue that marriage was a partnership where both spouses contributed differently, but Judge Sandoval cut through that argument quickly. She pointed out that while emotional support and domestic labor had value, my contributions were documented business investments that would have commanded significant fees if provided by any other attorney or consultant. The breakthrough came when Marcus finally acknowledged what we both knew to be true. Without my legal expertise, my financial backing, and my professional connections, Vasquez Development Group would never have survived its first major project. The zoning challenges, environmental regulations, and city permit processes that I had navigated had saved him millions in legal fees and years of potential delays. Judge Sandoval's recommended settlement was more generous than I had dared to hope. $8.5 million in immediate compensation, plus ongoing royalties from 3 major developments that were still generating revenue. The terms also included my removal from all loan guarantees going forward, protecting my personal assets from any future business failures. But the most important victory wasn't financial. It was Marcus's formal acknowledgement of my role as co-founder and equal partner in building his success. The settlement documents would become part of the public record, officially correcting the narrative that had erased me from our shared achievements for so many years. The moment Marcus signed those papers felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 2 decades. I watched him write his name on documents that finally told the truth about our partnership, and I realized that this wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about reclaiming my own history and identity. Carmen and I celebrated quietly that evening at a small restaurant in the Arts District, the part of San Antonio where I had always felt most at home. She raised her glass and told me she had never seen anyone document their contributions so thoroughly or fight for recognition with such strategic precision. I realized that somewhere in the process of demanding what I was worth, I had rediscovered the attorney I used to be. The settlement also included one symbolic element that mattered more than any dollar amount. I would keep the anniversary cufflinks I had bought for Marcus, not to give them to him, but as a reminder of the woman who had been thoughtful enough to honor someone else's family history while building wealth that would secure her own future. The marriage was over, but Elena Rodriguez Hartford was finally free to build something entirely her own. With $8.5 million and my freedom, I had choices I had never imagined possible. Carmen suggested I might want to return to legal practice, perhaps starting my own firm, specializing in business partnerships and women's financial rights. It was tempting, but 18 years away from courtrooms had shown me there were other ways to use my skills and passion. The building I found in the Southtown Arts District was everything the sterile corporate towers of Marcus's world were not. Built in 1924, it had housed everything from a printing press to a dance studio over the decades. The exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, and soaring ceilings reminded me why I had fallen in love with San Antonio's creative community long before I had gotten lost in the world of development deals and corporate parties. My children, both adults, now with careers of their own, surprised me with their enthusiasm for my gallery plans. My daughter, Sophia, a graphic designer in Austin, offered to help with branding and marketing. My son, Carlos, who worked in nonprofit management, connected me with local artists who had been struggling to find exhibition space. For the first time in years, family conversations centered around my dreams instead of their father's business. The gallery concept came to me during one of my late-night walks through the Arts District. I wanted to create something that showcased the incredible talent in San Antonio's Hispanic artistic community artists, whose work deserved recognition beyond the tourist markets and festival booths where they had been confined. My legal background would help me navigate contracts and artist rights, while my business experience could build sustainable careers for creative people. I decided to reclaim my maiden name professionally, becoming Elena Rodriguez Hartford again. The hyphenated version honored both my family heritage and my own journey, acknowledging where I had come from without being defined by where I had been. The business registration for Galleria Esperanza felt like signing my name on my own life for the first time in decades. The renovation process became a form of therapy. Every wall I painted, every display case I installed, every lighting fixture I selected was a choice I made based on my own vision and aesthetic preferences. No committees, no compromise, no deferring to someone else's idea of what projected the right image. The gallery would succeed or fail based on my decisions, and that responsibility felt liberating rather than frightening. Local artists began stopping by during construction, curious about the new gallery and the woman who was investing serious money in their community. Word spread that I wasn't just another wealthy patron looking for tax write-offs, but someone who understood contracts, intellectual property, and fair compensation for creative work. My legal background became an asset in ways I had never anticipated. The most satisfying moment came when I hung the first piece in my own gallery, a vibrant painting by a young Chicana artist that captured the spirit of resilience I had discovered in myself. The colors were bold, unapologetic, and full of life, everything I was learning to be as Elena Rodriguez Hartford gallery owner, an advocate for artists who deserve to be seen. For the first time in 20 years, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. 6 months after signing the settlement papers that officially ended my marriage, I stood in Galleria Esperanza, surrounded by 300 people, celebrating the opening of something I had built entirely on my own terms. The crowd included artists, collectors, city council members, and business leaders who had come to see what Elena Rodriguez Hartford had created with her newfound independence. The exhibition featured 22 local Hispanic artists, ranging from established painters whose work had never received proper gallery representation to emerging sculptors fresh out of art school. Each piece had been selected not just for its artistic merit, but for its story of resilience, identity, and cultural pride. The legal contracts I had negotiated ensured that artists retained ownership of their work while receiving fair compensation for sales and future licensing opportunities. Maya Guerrero, a muralist, whose large-scale canvas dominated the main wall, told a reporter that she had never worked with a gallery owner who understood both art and business law well enough to create contracts that actually protected artists' interests. Her enthusiasm was echoed by other exhibiting artists who had found someone willing to advocate for their financial rights as passionately as their creative vision. The mayor attended the opening, making a brief speech about San Antonio's commitment to supporting local arts and cultural entrepreneurship. Watching him praise my gallery's contribution to the city's creative economy felt surreal after years of being invisible at similar events. Carmen stood beside me during his remarks, reminding me quietly that 6 months ago I had been dismissed from a social function for having opinions about art. The sales exceeded my most optimistic projections. By the end of the evening, red dots marked 15 sold pieces, generating enough revenue to cover my operating expenses for the next 3 months while providing significant income for the participating artists. More importantly, 3 collectors commissioned original works directly from artists they had discovered at Galleria Esperanza, creating ongoing relationships that could sustain creative careers. Local media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. The San Antonio Express News arts writer described the gallery as filling a crucial gap in the city's cultural landscape, providing professional representation for artists whose work had been overlooked by more traditional venues. The article mentioned my legal background and business acumen, painting me as someone uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between artistic vision and commercial viability. The most meaningful moment came when Esperanza Morales, the elderly folk artist, for whom I had named the gallery, approached me near closing time. She had been creating intricate papel picado and traditional textiles for 60 years, selling them at markets and festivals, but never in a formal gallery setting. Seeing her work displayed with professional lighting and informative placards, she told me with tears in her eyes that she finally felt like a real artist. That night, I walked through the gallery alone after the last guest had left, seeing my reflection in the large windows that looked out onto the arts district. The woman staring back at me bore little resemblance to the one who had been escorted from the gala 8 months earlier. This version was confident, successful, and surrounded by work that celebrated creativity rather than dismissing it as unimportant. I was no longer someone's wife, trying to fit into their vision of success. I was Elena Rodriguez Hartford, and I was exactly where I belonged. While I was building something beautiful in the arts district, Marcus was discovering just how much of his success had depended on my invisible contributions. The first signs of trouble came when the Mesa Verde project, his flagship development on the east side, ran into environmental complications that would have been routine for me to resolve, but proved overwhelming for his current team. Carmen kept me updated on his struggles through mutual contacts in the legal community. Without my relationships at the city attorney's office, permit approvals that used to take weeks were now taking months. The regulatory expertise I had provided for free over 18 years suddenly required expensive consultation fees that cut deeply into his profit margins. Isabella's departure was as swift and calculated as her arrival had been. When Marcus's financial difficulties became public knowledge and his company's stock price started declining, she quietly transferred to their rival firm across town. Her new position there came with a significant salary increase, and rumor had it, access to a different set of wealthy married executives who might prove more reliable than Marcus had become. The irony wasn't lost on me that Isabella had abandoned Marcus, using the same opportunistic strategy she had probably planned to use with me. She had positioned herself as the young, ambitious professional who deserved recognition and advancement. But when those ambitions required loyalty through difficult times, she proved to be exactly as shallow and transactional as I had suspected. Marcus's attempts to maintain his lifestyle without my financial backing created a cascade of problems. The house we had shared sold quickly, but the proceeds barely covered his outstanding business loans and legal fees from our settlement. He was forced to downsize to a downtown condo that cost more per month than many people's annual salaries, but represented a dramatic step down from the mansion that had projected his former success. 2 of his major projects went into bankruptcy within a year of our settlement. The commercial development that was supposed to cement his reputation as a visionary developer instead became a cautionary tale about over-leveraged investments and poor risk management. Local business reporters began describing Vasquez Development Group as a company in decline, struggling to maintain relevance in a competitive market. The most telling indicator of his changed circumstances came when Marcus tried to secure financing for a new project near the medical center. The banks that had once courted his business now subjected him to intense scrutiny, requiring personal guarantees and collateral that he no longer possessed. The days when my signature could secure millions in development loans were over, and he was discovering that his personal creditworthiness had always been built on my financial foundation. Carmen mentioned that Marcus had reached out to several of my former colleagues, apparently hoping to hire legal expertise similar to what I had provided during our marriage. But paying market rates for the services I had given freely meant that his profit margins disappeared before construction even began. Watching his empire crumble wasn't particularly satisfying, but it was certainly educational. Every failed project and missed deadline proved what I had always known, but had been too modest to claim. I hadn't just supported Marcus's success, I had been essential to creating it. Within a year of opening Galleria Esperanza, I had become someone I had never imagined possible, a respected voice in San Antonio's cultural and business communities who was sought out for both my artistic vision and my legal expertise. The gallery had evolved beyond exhibitions to become a resource center where artists could access legal advice, business planning, and professional development opportunities. The mentorship program I had started attracted women from across the city who were navigating their own transitions between supporting someone else's dreams and pursuing their own ambitions. Every Tuesday evening, my gallery's back room hosted what we called Reclaiming Your Worth workshops, where women shared strategies for documenting their contributions, understanding their financial rights, and building independent careers. Carmen often joined these sessions as a guest speaker, explaining legal concepts in plain language that empowered rather than intimidated. Together, we had helped dozens of women understand their value in business partnerships, marriages, and family enterprises, where their work had become invisible over time. The stories they shared reminded me that my experience with Marcus wasn't unique. It was part of a much larger pattern of women's contributions being erased from narratives of success. One of my workshop participants, a woman named Rosa Delgado, had spent 15 years managing the financial side of her husband's restaurant chain while he received all the credit for their expansion across Texas. Using documentation strategies I had developed during my own case, she successfully negotiated recognition as co-owner and equal partner in their business. Watching her transformation from invisible bookkeeper to acknowledged business leader felt like reliving my own journey with a happier ending. The San Antonio Women's Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak at their annual conference about financial empowerment and entrepreneurship. Standing at that podium, addressing an audience of 300 businesswomen, I reflected on how different this felt from the corporate events where I had once stood silently beside Marcus while he received recognition for our shared achievements. My keynote address focused on the importance of documentation, legal awareness, and professional networks in protecting women's contributions to family wealth and business success. The enthusiastic response led to speaking engagements in Austin, Houston, and Dallas, where my story resonated with women facing similar challenges in male-dominated industries. The gallery's success had caught the attention of arts organizations statewide. I was appointed to the Texas Commission on the Arts, a position that allowed me to advocate for funding and resources for underrepresented artists across the state. The legal skills I had developed over 2 decades proved invaluable in navigating state bureaucracy and crafting policies that actually supported creative communities. Local magazines started featuring profiles about my transformation, from developer's wife to cultural entrepreneur. The articles described me as a role model for women reinventing themselves after major life changes. But I knew the real story was simpler. I had finally stopped hiding my capabilities and started demanding recognition for my contributions. The network I was building through the gallery workshops and speaking engagements created opportunities I had never anticipated. Other gallery owners sought my advice on artist contracts. Lawyers referred clients who needed business planning for creative ventures and arts organizations, requested my expertise on funding applications and grant writing. I was no longer asking for a seat at the table. I was building my own table and inviting others to join me. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 18 months after I had walked out of that gala and into my new life. I recognized Marcus's handwriting immediately, the same careful script that had signed our marriage certificate 20 years earlier, and our divorce papers just over a year ago. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. His words were more honest than any conversation we had had during our marriage. Marcus acknowledged what we had both known, but never openly discussed, that my legal expertise, financial contributions, and professional relationships had been the foundation of his business empire. He admitted that losing my support had forced him to confront how much he had taken for granted, not just my work, but my intelligence and capabilities. The letter contained no requests for reconciliation or attempts to minimize the damage he had caused. Instead, it was a straightforward acknowledgement of my role in building everything he had achieved and an apology for allowing others to dismiss and diminish my contributions. He had apparently been following my gallery's success through mutual friends and local media coverage, and he expressed genuine pride in what I had accomplished independently. Most surprisingly, Marcus mentioned that he had been attending therapy to understand how he had become someone who could treat a partner's expertise as expendable. The man who had once dismissed my art interests as irrelevant hobbies was now acknowledging that my aesthetic sense and cultural knowledge had probably been more valuable than his business instincts all along. Isabella's approach to closure was characteristically self-serving. Her social media post appeared the same week as Marcus's letter, framed as a reflection on personal growth and learning from mistakes. She wrote about the importance of supporting other women and recognizing the contributions that often go unacknowledged in professional settings, as if she had been an advocate for women's rights all along, rather than someone who had actively tried to humiliate and erase me. The post generated hundreds of comments, mostly from women who weren't buying her sudden transformation into a feminist ally. Several people shared screenshots of her previous attacks on me, creating a public record of her hypocrisy that was more damaging to her reputation than any response I could have crafted. Carmen found Isabella's damage control attempt amusing, noting that it was probably driven by her new employer's concerns about her professional reputation. Apparently, her pattern of targeting other women had become evident at her new firm, and she was trying to rehabilitate her image before it affected her career prospects. I chose not to respond publicly to either Marcus's letter or Isabella's social media performance. Instead, I wrote a brief note thanking Marcus for his honesty and wishing him well in his recovery process. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply moving forward with dignity, rather than relitigating past grievances. The closure I had been seeking wasn't something Marcus or Isabella could provide through apologies or public relations campaigns. It had come from building something meaningful on my own terms and proving to myself that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's recognition or validation. Their acknowledgments were nice to receive, but they weren't necessary for my peace of mind or future success. At 55, I stood in my gallery on a warm October evening, preparing for Galleria Esperanza's second anniversary celebration. The woman arranging flowers and adjusting lighting bore little resemblance to the invisible wife who had been escorted from a gala 2 years earlier. My hair was shorter now, silver streaks embraced rather than hidden, and I wore clothes chosen for comfort and personal style, rather than someone else's idea of appropriate corporate wife attire. The gallery had evolved beyond my wildest expectations. We now represented 43 artists, had launched a scholarship program for emerging Hispanic creatives, and had opened a second location in Austin that was already generating interest from collectors across Texas. The legal clinic I had established helped artists navigate contracts, intellectual property issues, and business formation, filling a gap I had identified through my own transition from supporting someone else's career to building my own. My children had become genuine friends rather than obligations to manage around their father's schedule. Sophia was planning her wedding and had asked me to officiate the ceremony, a request that would have been impossible when I was defined primarily as Marcus's wife, rather than as someone with her own accomplishments and wisdom to offer. Carlos had started bringing his boyfriend to family gatherings, comfortable with a version of his mother who was confident enough in her own identity to celebrate others' authenticity. The anniversary celebration drew nearly 400 people, including Mayor Gutierrez, several city council members, and arts leaders from across Texas. But the guest who made the evening most memorable was Dr. Rafael Santos, the curator from the San Antonio Museum of Art, who had been quietly supporting my gallery's educational programs for the past year. Rafael and I had developed a friendship built on shared passion for Mexican and Chicano art, long conversations about cultural preservation, and mutual respect for each other's expertise. He had been married for 25 years to a woman who had died of cancer 3 years earlier, and our relationship had grown slowly from professional collaboration to personal connection. At 62, he understood the value of patience and the importance of building something real, rather than rushing into romance for its own sake. Our relationship was nothing like my marriage to Marcus had been. Raphael sought my opinions, respected my expertise, and celebrated my successes without feeling threatened by my independence. When I mentioned a potential expansion to Houston, he offered practical advice and emotional support, rather than trying to talk me out of pursuing opportunities that might complicate his life. During the anniversary celebration, I found myself standing beside Raphael as we watched a young artist explain her work to potential collectors. The confidence in her voice, the respect she commanded, the fair compensation she would receive for her creativity, all of it represented the kind of change I had hoped to create when I first opened these doors. 2 years earlier, I had been someone whose art interests were dismissed as irrelevant to serious business discussions. Now, I was running a successful enterprise that supported dozens of creative careers while generating enough profit to expand across the state. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning.